September 30th, 2020. Leipzig, Germany. A researcher named Hugo Zeberg submits a paper to Nature. 4 pages. It will be cited over 1,300 times in the next 4 years. Here is what it said. If you have South Asian ancestry, if your family comes from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, there is roughly a 50% chance you are carrying a gene variant in your chromosome 3 that came from a Neanderthal who died in a Croatian cave 50,000 years ago. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, that specific variant tripled your risk of ending up on a ventilator. Not doubled, tripled. Now, you may have heard the general idea that modern humans carry some Neanderthal DNA, maybe 1 or 2%. It's been on the news, it's been on other channels, it's a fun fact people share at dinner. And that version of the story is correct, but it is also catastrophically incomplete. Because the question was never how much Neanderthal DNA different populations carry. The question, the one that actually matters, is which piece. Stay with me, because this next part is the reason this video exists. The COVID-19 Host Genetics Initiative pulled data from 3,199 hospitalized patients and nearly 900,000 controls across 8 independent studies. They found one region in the human genome that stood above everything else as a predictor of severe illness. One region. And when Hugo Zeberg and Svante Pääbo, director of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, traced that region back through time, it matched, almost perfectly, the genome of a Neanderthal woman recovered from Vindija Cave in Croatia. She died approximately 50,000 years ago. Her chromosome 3 is in the bodies of roughly 800 million people alive right now. If you've ever actually wondered where you come from, not the family story, but the real biological answer, then subscribe. Because what comes next goes deeper than most people are willing to go. The standard story about Neanderthal DNA is interesting, marginal, and mostly harmless. This episode is going to dismantle that story. Not because it's wrong, but because it stops exactly where things get serious. Every segment from here forward removes one assumption you didn't know you were holding. In the UK Biobank dataset used to verify this finding, individuals of South Asian ancestry showed the highest enrichment for that Vindija haplotype among all the groups tested. These weren't ancient samples in a lab. These were living people, filling out health questionnaires in British hospitals, not knowing what sat in their chromosome 3. One meeting 60,000 years ago. One population of Homo sapiens crossing into Neanderthal territory in the Middle East. Every human outside Africa alive today descends from that crossing. One window. And the variant that came through it is distributed across the modern world in a pattern that should be geographically impossible, because the Neanderthals who carried it lived in Europe, not South Asia. That's where we start. Actually, before we go any further, I want to know something. Drop it in the comments right now. Roughly what part of the world did your ancestors come from? Just a region, a country, a continent. I mean it, I read them. Because by the end of this video, that answer is going to feel completely different to you. I promise. Here's a fact that has bothered researchers for years. Every Neanderthal fossil ever recovered sits within a corridor stretching from Spain to the Altai Mountains of Central Asia. That's the map. That is where Neanderthals lived, moved, and died. The easternmost confirmed Neanderthal remains are from Okladnikov Cave in Siberia. Not one verified Neanderthal bone has ever been found in China, not in Japan, not in Korea, not across Southeast Asia. Not one, and yet East Asian populations today carry up to 4% Neanderthal DNA, the highest concentration of any population on Earth. Think about that. The people who live farthest from where Neanderthals actually existed carry the most of their genetic material, and the people who live directly on top of where Neanderthal bones are buried carry less. Dr. Matthias Kerr at the University of Geneva put it plainly when his team published their findings in Science Advances in October 2023. His research team had analyzed the distribution of Neanderthal DNA across 2,625 modern human genomes spanning 40,000 years of time depth. And what Karat said out loud, in those precise words, was this: an area where we've never found any Neanderthal remains has more Neanderthal DNA. Both datasets are correct. That's what makes it complicated. And yet, the data said the exact opposite of what geography should predict. This is not a mystery without a solution. It is a fingerprint. It tells us something specific happened, not at the moment of interbreeding, but after it. Something moved through Europe. Something that carried almost no Neanderthal DNA at all. And wherever it went, it diluted what had been there for tens of thousands of years. Here's what that looks like in the actual ancient record. Hunter-gatherers across Ice Age Europe, the Gravettians, the Magdalenians, the people who painted the caves, had Neanderthal ancestry comparable to modern East Asians or higher. We know this from ancient genome studies. Their DNA has been extracted. It has been sequenced. It is documented. Those people had what East Asians have now. And then, roughly 10,000 years ago, something arrived from the southeast and began to overwrite them. We know where it came from. We know approximately when it happened. We even know what they were carrying instead of Neanderthal DNA. A migration wave reshaped the genetic architecture of an entire continent, reducing the Neanderthal signal in every population it touched, redistributing variants that now carry measurable medical consequences. And it left no political name, no empire, no remembered civilization in the historical record. We call them the early European farmers. They came from Anatolia. They had almost no Neanderthal DNA at all. Roughly 10,000 years ago, on the Anatolian plateau, in what is now central Turkey, farming communities began expanding northwest at a rate of about 1 kilometer per year. They were not an army. There was no conquest, no declared war. Just people moving slowly, carrying grain and cattle, and a genome that had almost no Neanderthal ancestry whatsoever. And in moving across Europe, they did something that 40,000 years of natural selection had not managed to do. They quietly overwrote the Neanderthal signal that had been sitting in European genomes since the first crossing. The 2023 Science Advances study by Quilodrán, Rio, and Karat at the University of Geneva made this explicit. European hunter-gatherers in the pre-Neolithic period, before these farmers arrived, had Neanderthal ancestry comparable to or higher than modern East Asians. Karat's own words, the Anatolian farmers had less Neanderthal ancestry, so they diluted the Neanderthal ancestry in European populations. It's arithmetic, not invasion, not selection, dilution. Professor David Reich at Harvard Medical School and Dr. Wolfgang Haak at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology have spent years building the ancient genomic database that makes this visible in real time. Their 2015 Nature study, which included the first genome-wide ancient DNA from Anatolian Neolithic farmers, confirmed these people were the source population for Europe's first farmers, and that they carried a strikingly different genetic profile from the hunter-gatherers they mixed with and eventually displaced. But here's where it gets strange. East Asians did not acquire additional Neanderthal DNA. Europeans lost theirs. This is a subtractive story, not an additive one. The group with the highest apparent Neanderthal load today is simply the group that never received the dilution wave, because the Anatolian farming expansion went northwest, not east. East Asians are not genetically exceptional. They are the control group. They show us what the original post-interbreeding distribution looked like before 10,000 years of agricultural migration erased it from one half of Eurasia. There is a man named Labrania I. He is not famous. He has no monument. He was a hunter-gatherer buried in northern Spain around 5900 BCE. His genome extracted from his petrous bone and sequenced at high coverage. His Neanderthal ancestry levels were significantly higher than those of modern Spaniards. He is a snapshot, frozen in time, of what European genomes looked like before the Anatolian replacement. He was already dead by the time the farmers arrived. His descendants were absorbed or displaced within a few thousand years. Everything the field initially assumed about Neanderthal DNA distribution was precisely backwards. Europe, home of the Neanderthals themselves, the place where their bones are buried, now carries the lowest Neanderthal load of any non-African population on Earth. Not because Europe interbred less, because Europe was overwritten, and there is one more inversion the data reveals. The population that carries the dangerous Neanderthal variant today, the chromosome 3 haplotype, the one linked to severe COVID-19, is not the one that lives where Neanderthals lived. It never was. Vindija Cave, northern Croatia, 2017. A team from the Max Planck Institute extracts high-coverage genomic data from a Neanderthal woman. Her sample designation in the scientific literature is Vindija 33.199. She died approximately 50,000 years ago. She has no name, she has a number. And that number will eventually appear in over 1,300 scientific papers, including one published in September 2020 that connected her directly to a global pandemic. Hugo Zeberg had been working at the Max Planck Institute and Karolinska Institute when the COVID-19 Host Genetics Initiative released its data. The signal coming out of chromosome 3, a locus called 3p2131, was impossible to ignore. It was the single dominant genetic predictor of severe COVID-19 and respiratory failure in the dataset, dwarfing every other candidate. Zeberg and Svante Pääbo checked it against what they knew. The risk alleles at this exact position appeared in homozygous form in the Vindija 3319 genome. The match was not approximate, it was precise. Carrier frequency of this haplotype today: approximately 50% in South Asia, 16% in Europe, around 9% in populations with mixed American ancestry. Near zero in East Asia, near zero in Sub-Saharan Africa, This discovery was published in September 2020. Most people never heard about it until now. Chromosome 3 Neanderthal haplotypes is not a relic sitting dormant in the genome. It is an active regulatory sequence currently influencing immune response, cytokine signaling, and respiratory function in living people. The Neanderthal genome did not go extinct when the last Neanderthal died. Portions of it are running right now in living cells in populations that had never heard the word Neanderthal before a genetics company mailed them a report. In the UK biobank cohort that confirmed this association, patients of South Asian descent showed the highest enrichment for the Vindija haplotype among all groups tested. These were not ancient samples in a freezer. These were specific individuals in British hospitals, admitted during the 2020 COVID-19 surge. Their chromosome 3 matched a Croatian cave specimen from 50,000 years before they were born. Hold on, I want to connect something for a second. In our last video, we looked at how medieval soldiers were given substances before battle, compounds that altered their biology, changed their responses, and none of them understood the mechanism. Not one of them knew what was happening inside them. This is the exact same structure, a 50,000-year-old piece of genetic code operating inside a living body, changing a medical outcome, and the person carrying it has no idea it exists. Does that parallel disturb you, or does it make you feel connected to something larger? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Now here is what the timeline cannot explain. The Neolithic Anatolian migration, the dilution wave we just traced through Europe, moved through South Asia's northwest corridor before pushing into Europe. If that migration carried low Neanderthal ancestry and reduced the signal wherever it went, why did South Asia retain the chromosome 3 variant at 50%? That number should have dropped. Something preserved it. Something, in the language of population genetics, selected for it. And no research team has published a complete answer to that question. The case file is open. Let's be precise about something. The chromosome 3 Neanderthal haplotype does not cause disease. Not on its own. Not in isolation. For tens of thousands of years, it persisted in South Asian populations without apparent disadvantage. A carrier frequency of 50% does not survive natural selection if the trait is consistently harmful. That is not how selection works. Something kept this variant in the population. Something in that environment over that timescale may have wanted it there. Dr. April Way at Cornell University spent years working on exactly this kind of question. Her team published in eLife in 2023, a study using 300,000 UK biobank participants, analyzing over 235,000 genetic variants of likely Neanderthal origin. What they found was this: 303 specific Neanderthal-derived variants are actively influencing 47 distinct human traits in people alive today. Not theoretically, actively. The strongest signals were in immune regulation, metabolic rate, pain sensitivity, and respiratory parameters. The immune system and the respiratory system, the two systems most directly involved in COVID-19 severity, are precisely where Neanderthal DNA retains its highest functional footprint in modern humans. Think about what that means for a second. And yet, the data said something more complicated than Neanderthal DNA is good for immunity. A 2023 study published in Genome Biology and Evolution found that Neanderthal ancestry is associated with increased loads of DNA viruses, Epstein-Barr human herpesvirus 7, in modern carriers. Reduced control over those pathogens, but reduced susceptibility to RNA viruses. SARS-CoV-2 is an RNA virus. The chromosome 3 haplotype may have been calibrated for a completely different category of threat. Neanderthal immune variants are not errors. They are calibrations, set to the pathogen environment of Ice Age Eurasia, tuned to the threats that existed when these variants were selected. The problem in 2020 was not that the calibration was wrong. The problem was that it met a virus it had never been designed to handle. 50,000 years of preparation, aimed in a slightly different direction. Svante Pääbo said it publicly in September 2020, not as an academic observation, but as something close to grief. His exact words: "It is striking that the genetic heritage from the Neanderthals has such tragic consequences during the current pandemic." He did not say interesting. He said tragic. That is a precise word, chosen by a precise person. It means something. There is a variant in the human genome found only in populations that descend from the specific interbreeding event 60,000 years ago, not Neanderthal DNA broadly, but one haplotype, traced to one cave, recovered from one individual identified in the literature only by a sample number. It exists in living people as direct biological testimony of a specific moment in human history. If you carry it, you carry evidence of a meeting that happened 600 centuries ago. And that meeting may have changed what happened to some of your relatives in 2020. So, here is what we know. Neanderthals lived in Europe. Modern humans met them in the Middle East around 60,000 years ago, interbred, and carried that DNA into every corner of the non-African world. East Asians ended up with the most, not because they interbred more, but because the Anatolian farming migration diluted the European signal 10,000 years ago and never reached east far enough to do the same. The chromosome 3 variant, the one with pandemic-era medical consequences, concentrated in South Asia at 50% for reasons that selection pressure may explain, but the field hasn't fully resolved. That is a complete picture. The mechanism is clear. The geography makes sense. The story is over, except it isn't. There is a population that has been sitting outside this entire framework. And until 2020, nobody had the tools to find them there. Joshua Akey is a professor at Princeton University's Louis Sigler Institute for Integrative Genomics. His team spent years trying to solve a specific technical problem. Every existing method for detecting Neanderthal DNA in modern human genomes used African populations as a baseline, assuming Africans had zero Neanderthal ancestry because Neanderthals never lived in Africa. So African samples were the control. And if you set a population as the 0 point, you will never detect signal in that population. The method was, by design, blind. Akey's team built a new method. They called it IBD mix, identity by descent mixing. It doesn't use any modern reference population at all. It reads the Neanderthal sequence itself and asks, does this match? In 2020, they published in Cell, Sub-Saharan African populations. The people the entire field had classified as carrying zero Neanderthal DNA carry approximately 0.5% Neanderthal ancestry. A third of the amount found in Europeans and East Asians, but measurably, verifiably present. The finding didn't come from African Neanderthal interbreeding directly. It came from back migration. Populations that had interbred with Neanderthals returned to Africa thousands of years later and introduced those segments into African genomes through subsequent mixing. There is no human population on Earth with zero Neanderthal DNA. Not one. Every lineage studied so far carries it. Hold on to that, because it's about to mean something completely different. The 50% South Asian figure, the 4% East Asian figure, the 16% European figure, the near zero numbers that turned out not to be zero. These aren't just statistics. They are the residue of a demographic rewriting, a process that happened over 10,000 years and shaped not just ancestry but active biology. The distribution of Neanderthal DNA across living human populations is not a natural equilibrium. It is the aftermath of something, and one specific piece of that aftermath, the chromosome 3 haplotype, has a medical address in the present tense. The map was never stable. It was always being redrawn. We just didn't know it until we had the tools to read what was underneath. There is a question underneath all of this that the data keeps circling without answering. If natural selection removes harmful variants over time, and it does, then why does the chromosome 3 haplotype survive at 50% in South Asian populations? Why didn't selection drive it down? That concentration implies it was doing something useful for a very long time. A 2021 study in Nature Communications attempted to measure exactly this. Researchers analyzed over 400 distinct human traits and their relationship to Neanderthal-derived genetic variants. Most Neanderthal variants, they found, are being steadily depleted from the human genome over generations, selected against, slowly eliminated. But there are exceptions. Variants shared across multiple Neanderthal populations, the ones that appeared in more than one Neanderthal individual, the ones that persisted across thousands of years of Neanderthal history. Those are enriched for heritability in specific trait categories: hair and skin characteristics, immune function, bone density, lung capacity, chronotype, the body's internal clock, menopause timing. These are not trivial traits. These are the traits of environmental adaptation, the traits that matter when you are moving from one climate into another, encountering pathogens you have never met, surviving winters at latitudes where your ancestors never lived. Dr. Kaustubh Adhikari's team at University College London published in Communications Biology in 2023 a study of over 6,000 Latin Americans and found direct evidence that a Neanderthal introgressed variant at chromosome 1q32.3 influences the height of the nasal bridge in modern humans, the shape of your nose. Not metaphorically, literally, measurably, the vertical height of the midface. Neanderthals had a distinctive nasal morphology adapted to cold, dry air. That morphology, it turns out, came with a genetic instruction still being followed in living faces today. The same review in Current Biology noted a Neanderthal haplotype covering the P2F3 gene, a gene involved in skin cell regulation, present at roughly 60% frequency in East Asians, while nearly absent in Europeans. The BNC2 haplotype on chromosome 9, associated with skin pigmentation and freckling, runs at 70% in European populations. Different populations inherited different pieces, not randomly, adaptively. The variants that helped human bodies survive in the specific environments their ancestors moved into are the ones that stayed. Cold climates, new pathogens, high altitudes, novel diets. Each environment kept what was useful and let the rest drift away. The Neanderthal's genome didn't disappear. It was disaggregated, split across populations according to what each environment required. But here is where the logic breaks down. The chromosome 3 haplotype, the one calibrated apparently for RNA virus defense in Ice Age Eurasia, survives at 50% in South Asia, not in the environments where Neanderthals lived. If adaptive selection explains the other distributions, what's selected for this one, in this place, at this frequency? The question is still open. The answer when it comes will be significant. The body kept things it needed, and some of what it kept it no longer understands how to use. We have been building toward this. Every segment of this episode has been showing you the same thing from a different angle, that Neanderthal DNA is not distributed evenly. That the distribution was shaped by specific demographic events, and that the distribution has real-world medical consequences that are still active. Now let's put it together, not as a summary, as a confrontation. East Asians carry the most total Neanderthal DNA of any population on Earth, up to 4%. They live in the region with the fewest Neanderthal fossils. They received their Neanderthal ancestry from the original out-of-Africa crossing and were never diluted by the Anatolian farming wave. The variants they carry are concentrated in skin and hair regulation, the PO2F3 haplotype at 60%, among others, traits associated with adaptation to East Asian environments. South Asians carry approximately 1.5 to 2% total Neanderthal DNA, lower than East Asians. But they carry the chromosome 3 haplotype, the COVID-19 severity variant, at roughly 50%. That variant is nearly absent in East Asians, despite their higher total Neanderthal load. More Neanderthal ancestry does not predict which Neanderthal variants you carry. The total percentage and the specific functional content are completely different variables. This is the detonation point of this entire episode, the thing that should stop you. More Neanderthal DNA does not protect you. The question was never how much, it was always which piece. And the piece with the most clearly documented medical consequence in the modern world is not concentrated in the population with the most Neanderthal DNA. It is concentrated in a different population entirely, at frequencies that suggest something in their demographic history actively preserved it, and nobody has a complete explanation for why. A 2023 eLife study by Dr. April Way at Cornell confirmed that 4,303 specific Neanderthal-derived genetic variants are influencing 47 active traits in people today. Lung capacity is in that list. Immune response is in that list. These are not fossils. They are running code. And if you are of South Asian, European, East Asian, mixed, or, thanks to Joshua Akey's work, even African ancestry, some version of that code is in you. The percentages differ, the specific variants differ, but the inheritance is universal. Here is the part that I cannot stop thinking about. The woman in Vindija Cave, Vindija 33-9, died approximately 50,000 years ago in what is now Croatia. Her species was already in decline. Within 10,000 years of her death, Neanderthals would be gone entirely. Absorbed, outcompeted, replaced. She left no known descendants, no culture that survived, no name. And yet a portion of her chromosome 3 is currently inside hundreds of millions of living people, actively influencing how their immune systems respond to respiratory viruses. She is not extinct, not entirely, not in the way we usually mean. There are things this episode cannot answer. Why does the chromosome 3 haplotype sit at 50% in South Asia, a region that received the diluting Anatolian farming wave, when selection should have reduced it if it were neutral or eliminated it if it were harmful? What was it protecting against in the 49,980 years before SARS-CoV-2 arrived? Was it the pathogen environment of the Indus Valley? A disease pressure specific to that corridor, that climate, that population density? The evidence points in that direction. The field hasn't settled it. Why does East Asia carry the most total Neanderthal ancestry, but almost none of the chromosome 3 variant? The geographic distribution of Neanderthal fossils doesn't explain it. The Anatolian dilution doesn't explain it. That wave went northwest, not east. Something else shaped the East Asian Neanderthal profile differently. What was different about the interbreeding events, or the selection pressures afterward, that produced this specific absence? The study from 2023 tracks the distribution. It does not answer that question, and there is a larger one. We have just established from multiple independent lines of evidence that Neanderthal DNA is not a relic. It is an active biological presence, distributed across all living human populations, influencing immune function, respiratory capacity, skin and hair regulation, pain sensitivity, sleep timing, and bone density. The 2020 pandemic gave us the first fully documented case where a specific Neanderthal variant had a measurable, quantifiable impact on modern human mortality. The first. It will not be the last question that gets asked. If you are South Asian, that variant may be in you right now. If you are East Asian, you may carry the PO2F3 haplotype at chromosome 11, influencing your skin's response to its environment. If you are European, there is a 70% chance you carry the BNC2 haplotype on chromosome 9, associated with pigmentation, an Ice Age adaptation, running in your keratinocytes today. If you have African ancestry, Joshua Akey's work showed that the assumption of zero Neanderthal DNA was an artifact of the method, not the biology. You carry it too. The percentages differ, the specific variants differ, the inheritance is universal. The Neanderthals are not in the past. They are distributed across the present, disaggregated into the genomes of 8 billion people, each carrying a different fragment of a species that has been officially extinct for 40,000 years. The species ended, the biology did not. What Vindija 3319 carried in her chromosome 3 was not a death sentence, not for her, not for the people who inherited it. It was a calibration. It was her immune system's accumulated answer to the pathogens of her world. It has been running for 50,000 years in bodies that never knew her name. It ran in 2020 in hospital wards in London and Mumbai and Toronto. It is running right now. The question the science cannot yet answer, the one that will drive the next decade of research, is simple and enormous. In a world of novel pathogens, of emerging viruses, of the next SARS-CoV-2 and the one after that, which Neanderthal variant is the next one to matter? In which population? Protecting against what? Or making which outcome more likely? We do not know. The research is ongoing. The genomes of 8 billion living people are waiting for the question to be asked precisely enough to be answered. And somewhere in Croatia, 50,000 years deep in a limestone cave, the answer was already written.